Today we've got Dr. Lynch with us. He's a longtime friend of mine and influenced me with his great book, Dirty Genes. Dr. Lynch, thanks so much for being with us today.
Awesome to be here and great to see you again, Peter.
Let's start with your story. Like, what got you into looking at genetic testing, genetic SNPs? What's your background and expertise here?
Yeah. So my undergraduate was cell molecular biology from the University of Washington, which then through a very roundabout way got me to Bastyr University and got my degree in doctorate in naturopathic medicine. Um, I would say that while I was studying at Bastyr, working with patients, despite being in naturopathic medical school, we were still treating the ICD-9 code at that time, now 10 or whatever it is nowadays, um, versus the patient. And in naturopathic medicine, we are taught that you work with the patient, not the condition. If someone walks in with thyroid dysfunction or celiac disease, you don't treat the celiac or the thyroid dysfunction, you support the person because everybody's reason why they got there is different. And I noticed when I was on the environmental medicine shift, people would come in with, a plethora of issues. We would test them, find heavy loads of mercury, arsenic, and so on, and we chelate them, and we chelate them basically the same. We'd, of course, adjust dosages of DMSA and EDTA and DMPS as needed. But I would see people respond very well and other people not respond at all, and other people would respond very negatively. And it was especially around sulfur compounds. And I was wondering, I was like, is there a cofactor deficiency? Are we pushing so much sulfur or what's going on here? And the doctors are like, I don't really know. And so I just did a quick research on PubMed and I found out that molybdenum was a necessary cofactor for sulfation pathways. And so we started giving patients molybdenum when they had DMSA reactions and it really helped them. And then other people were still struggling. And then I started looking and I was like, okay, phase two detoxification is probably slower than phase one. And I was like, okay, let's stop pushing phase one. Let's put more phase two. So we did that. And then I started thinking, well, is there a genetic component to this? And this is like 2008, when genetics wasn't really a thing. 23andMe wasn't alive back then. And I think Genova had really the only detoxification panel back in the day. And honestly, it wasn't that good. So I think what got me into genetic testing was working at the individual level at a deeper level than just biochemical level. It's like if you identify someone has a specific genetic variation, then they may not be able to, that particular enzyme may not function as fully as someone else who has a typical functioning enzyme. But then you have to take an account of cofactors and nutrition and other things as well. And when I started looking at MTHFR, that was the first gene I ever started looking at because someone's reached out and said, hey, Dr. Lynch, I struggle with bipolar. What do you got for me? And I started just writing the usual stuff, fish oil, gluten-free, all these things. And I was like, I should visit the research because I haven't visited in so long. And I knew folate was associated with bipolar, but I didn't know how. So I typed in bipolar folate in PubMed, National Library of Medicine, and it came back with a research article that said bipolar, and it had this acronym of MTHFR, and it said folate. And so I'm reading the abstract, and I didn't know what the hell MTHFR was. And this was like 2009. And so I copied and pasted MTHFR back into PubMed, and I only searched MTHFR. And when the results came back, I was like, oh my God, this is significant. And I say that because if you type in MTHFR in National Library of Medicine and you just look at the headlines or the research articles, it's associated with basically everything known to man and woman, pregnancy complications, infertility, dementia, cancers of various types, cardiovascular issues, pulmonary issues, mood disorders, and so on. And so that was my first take on it, and that led me down a huge rabbit hole, and here I am today, and here we are. What? How many years later? Still talking about it.
15 years.
Yeah.
So you mentioned initially molybdenum and sulfur with heavy metal detoxification. Can we tackle that in a little bit more detail for the audience and make it make sense for the layman? Because there's
Yeah.
plenty of people out there doing metal detoxes, feeling like garbage, right? Wondering why
Mm,
they're struggling.
yeah.
Could you kind of walk us through that and maybe make it make simple sense?
Yeah. So let's just start with detoxification itself. So detoxification is basically the should be the identification of particular compounds that are toxic, detox, to your body that you want to remove. And your body has built-in systems in order to remove them. Problem is those systems get overwhelmed, and if they get overwhelmed, then those toxicants build up. And as they build up, they start messing up your enzymatic function to the point where you start getting significant symptoms. And that comes to the what Peter held up earlier today is the concept of dirty gene. A dirty gene is a gene that's not functioning very well, and toxicants are a huge role in that. So you want to detox, you want to remove those toxicants, and the best way to detox is actually to not get toxed in the first place. you you want air filtration. You want to build a home that doesn't have formaldehyde in the press board. You don't want carpets with formaldehyde. My office here, I've got real wood, which does leach some formaldehyde, but not nearly as much as press board. And so when individuals detox, they look for supplements or they look for things that they can do. Fasting is all the rage these days, which is great, but also potentially dangerous. Sauna is very useful. And then people take various supplements. Some people take gallbladder flushes or what have you. And the bottom line with detoxification is there needs to be a right time for it. Women, you shouldn't be doing it when you're obviously pregnant or breastfeeding. You shouldn't be doing it when you're trying to conceive. You shouldn't be doing it if you are weak or you're an athlete, you're competing actively. You probably shouldn't be doing it right around your menses because that's depleting. So Chinese medicine has a whole theory on that as well, and probably not even theory, but actual evidence behind their thousands of years of evidence. And I also say when you are properly detoxing, you should feel only better. You should never feel worse. Imagine if go back to that moment where you had to really go number two. I mean, badly. And you barely made it. I mean, your pants were barely at your ankles before the stuff happened. And afterwards, you felt great. You relieved that and you felt amazing. That's how detoxification should be. You should feel all kind of balled up. And then if you detox properly, you should feel lighter. You should feel clearer. You should feel happier. And a lot of people, health professionals included, will say, oh, I'm going through a detox reaction. I just need to push through it. No, what you are going through is you have mobilized these stored toxicants, typically from fat. If you're trying to detox, oftentimes, especially if you're doing weight loss or some type of metabolic fasting, you will mobilize these toxicants from your stored fat tissues. You can also mobilize them from bone, elderly women, especially from osteopenia and porosis. But let's talk about just coming from the fat. So you've moved these toxicants, pesticides, herbicides, from safely being in your fat. Now they're in your blood. And now that blood is circulating to all your organs, through all your organs, including your brain. So now you're poisoning your brain by circulating these toxicants throughout your body versus actually eliminating them through sweat, fecal matter, bile, which also should go through the fecal route, breathing is also another route. So this was my specialty. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Bill Ray in Texas, at the Environmental Health Center Dallas before he passed, and I studied with him, learned a ton, and I still practice environmental medicine, in terms of I don't see patients actively, but I still study it actively, and because it's by far the number one thing for dirtying our genes, and the amount of chemicals that are in our environment is absurd, and it's not very well regulated, and it's everywhere in your food, it's in schools, it's in your home, it's in your car, it's in your office, they're everywhere.